Hello, and welcome to Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue. Minding the Forest is where we talk about all things forestry, from landowners to loggers to wood manufacturers. All play an important role in the conservation and management of forests for the important renewable natural resource it is. Managed forests offer more for wildlife and water protection, so the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Minding the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office, or you can find them online at firstsouthland.com. In today's episode, we talk about sustainable forestry with Jeremy Poirier of International Paper. We have with us today Jeremy Poirier. Jeremy is the Senior Manager for Fiber Certification and Sustainability for International Paper, and we call IP. Jeremy, good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Tell us a little about where you're from and how you got here.
Let's see, I grew up in a little kind of sleepy town south of Cape Canaveral in Indialantic, Florida. I went to undergrad in South Carolina at a small school called Presbyterian College. Started to work for IP right after I graduated, so I've got an undergrad in biology. I worked at our Forest Research Center that IP used to own in Bainbridge, Georgia, and started out kind of in the forestry and ecology and wildlife work. Great job, great experience. I actually went back to grad school a couple years later. So I got my master's in forestry at Clemson with a kind of a concentration in wildlife management. So I moved around a little bit in IP. Was in Virginia, North Carolina for a while, and came out to Louisiana, I think in 2005, actually right before we announced our land sale. A lot of folks remember that IP used to own about 6 million acres in the U.S. We sold that back in 2005, 2006. And I've taken on a variety of roles kind of in Louisiana. I was down at Mansfield, the Mansfield Mill, taking on a timber acquisition and procurement role. And for the last, I think it's been over 10 years now, I've really kind of concentrated more kind of on this overall fiber sustainability, forest certification, primarily at the kind of the request from our customers who are getting, I would say more and more concerned about supply chain, traceability. They want to understand where the wood that's in their products, where that's coming from, how it's managed, how it's harvested, how it affects things like water quality, air, carbon, biodiversity. So those are all questions that we're getting from our customers, and so yeah, that's my story. Live here in Shreveport. Got a wife and two kids. It's been great.
Well, we're glad to have you part of LFA as well. You've been, I think, an integral part of lots of things. And we'll talk about in a little bit is the BMP manual. We just redid that, took a little bit, and is effective this year in 2023. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But let's get to sustainability. I mean, that is something that is, but it has been important to companies like IP of late, but it seems to be that is a growing thing. The importance of knowing, as you said, where the wood is coming from and how the forests are managed before you receive that fiber. So why do you suppose that importance is growing even more now?
It's a good question. It's and I guess I'll answer it this way. I think, sustainability is kind of the buzzword of the day. You kind of read it in the news. It's everywhere. What's interesting, us in the natural resources professions, particularly like in forestry, or, kind of roll our eyes a little bit and say, well, heck, we've been doing this for how long? For 100 years of planting, growing, harvesting trees, making these great products. And now folks are kind of saying, is that sustainable? Well, you can kind of look around at the landscape and there's kind of proof there. But it's a challenging conversation to have. And I think, particularly for our business, I think it's best described almost like this. We like to say, we take a high emotion resource and make a low emotion product. So think about that. We take forest and trees and we turn them into these products that everyone uses every day. So if you think about our box business, we make a lot of liner board for boxes. But people really don't care about the box. They care about what's in the box.
Right.
So sometimes the box can be kind of seen as wasteful. And you see that a lot in kind of paper products. And so there's this conversation about, should I be using this box to kind of promote, let's just say, harvesting trees or cutting trees down. But what the general public really doesn't understand, or they don't kind of think about it this way, that the demand for the product actually keeps kind of working forest working. And so that's the kind of concept that we're really trying to drive home with folks is, you need to be proud of having a tree in your product. It's a renewable resource. The demand for them creates more trees. It supports private landowners, supports forest, which of course we know promotes all the things that we know that forests provide. I mean, once again, wildlife habitat, clean water, a source for carbon uptake, clean air, all those things. So I think there's that disconnect that's out there, I think, in society of, we need to kind of get away from harvesting trees because they don't really see or understand the full cycle. And most of our customers really don't understand who owns the forest in the U.S. Southeast, which is all, we know is privately owned.
You had mentioned earlier about IP selling its land. It had many acres of forest in the past, and it got really out of that. But it still goes to, like you just said, to private landowners. So it's not these big corporations. It is something that engages the private citizen in, one, what they own, and two, what they can do with it. We've got more forest in Louisiana now than we did just 5 years ago. Even with the devastation from the hurricanes in the past years, we've got lots of forests in Louisiana. So that is a good example.
I think we all locally understand that. We understand it in this state and other states in the U.S. Southeast. But when you work for a global organization, a lot of our customers are not from the U.S. South. They just have their education and where they grew up. Maybe in more of an urban environment, they just haven't had the kind of connection that we have, and so they have really good questions, but there's kind of a lack of kind of basic understanding of kind of who owns it, why landowners are planting trees. Well, what we like to do now is we're definitely getting our customers out in the woods, and we've got a bunch of events planned this year. We do it kind of all over the U.S. Mm-hmm. We learned during COVID, we all kind of got frustrated with working virtual, but imagine having this type of conversation virtually. You really, a lot of folks on this podcast probably know this or listen to this, is the only way to kind of learn is to kind of be outside and actually do it. And, once our customers and our stakeholders kind of experience what all of us kind of do every day, and they see the good things that are happening, they see the thought that goes into the forest management plans, they see and understand, that these loggers are trained and they understand what they're doing. There's all these, kind of checks and balances. That makes them feel a lot better. I think a lot of times people just assume that the trees are just cut down and they're just kind of hauled into the mills, and we have no idea where they're coming from, and we don't know who these loggers and suppliers are. But that's just simply not the case.
The phrase "managed forests," I guess, can sometimes maybe give a wrong impression. You think of forest as the wildlife, things of that nature, but you throw in managed there, it's like, oh, well, okay, man is coming in and doing something. But that doing something actually is a positive thing. So let's talk a little bit about the sustainability. How do you go about making sure that the forests that you deal with and the fiber that you get is from managed forest?
Yeah, it's a good question, and just to be clear, our company, and we have what's called these Vision 2030 goals, what we want to strive to kind of do. We have a goal of 100% of our fiber coming from sustainably managed forest, and I want to clarify that for folks to understand that we don't have a goal that says all the fiber that we buy has to be certified, because we support the forest certification systems out there. But we also recognize there are other ways to demonstrate sustainability outside of certification. Certification can be expensive. It can sometimes just not be the right fit for a certain landowner for a variety of reasons. Most of the time, and our experience shows that most landowners are already practicing sustainable forest management, regardless if they have a kind of a stamp or not. And so, we wanted to kind of set our goals appropriately to kind of recognize that. Now, it does take some more due diligence from us, and it takes some different conversations that we have to have with our loggers But there are things that we kind of look for. I mean, forest management plans are kind of good signs of sustainable forest management. Most landowners are thinking about these three things. We kind of think about it like a three-legged stool. It's the ecological, it's the economic, and it's the kind of social aspects of forestry. When all those three things are incorporated into a timber sale, into a forest management plan, I mean, that's kind of a clear demonstration of sustainable forest management. I think one of the messages that I'd like to kind of give is it's things like you mentioned BMPs and best management practices, how important those are for us and our customers. I mean, yes, they are voluntary, but in theory for us, they are kind of mandatory. I mean, we have contracts for all of our loggers and wood suppliers that deliver into IP mills, and in that contract it states that they must follow BMPs. So it is kind of in turn a requirement. And it's just so important because that's the same message in what we're telling our customers, that these landowners and these loggers are following state BMPs. It's just important that everyone out there in our supply chain, I want folks to kind of embrace what they're doing, but also to know that what they do matters. A good way of saying it is because we need folks out there doing the right things the right way all the time, because all it takes is one kind of, let's just say, a logging job that didn't go as well on the side of the road or along a river or creek that the public is using, and it kind of throws the whole narrative around. It takes one bad job for folks to kind of see something they really don't like, and then it affects the whole state, and it can affect the whole logging community. So it's just really important that all of us are just kind of paying attention to what we're doing and follow state BMPs. I mean, that's why they're there.
Yeah, let's talk about BMP's best management practices. These are the things that loggers follow, that landowners really keep a close eye on as well, to make sure that, as you said, things are being done properly, that the harvest isn't damaging the soil or damaging the land in such a way that it won't be able to be regenerated, in essence, that you won't stop a good flow of water filtration so that streams don't get muddied or things of that nature. It was a 3-year process, but the LFA and its state implementation committee looked at all of the BMPs and considered what other states are doing and sort of modified, fine-tuned a few things in the best management practices, or BMPs, for Louisiana. One of the things that you took a lead in was, for the first time, having recommendations for wildlife, to take that into account in all that. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
I was involved really early on with that committee, and exactly like you said, I really like the way it was framed up, where we kind of looked at all the other states and figured out where our gaps were, and we even involved some other kind of certification auditors to kind of figure out, their input. The wildlife aspect, I was really glad to kind of see that go all the way through. And the original thought there was, look, a lot of these landowners are interested on things they can do on their property to enhance wildlife. I mean, we know most of our private landowners are out there deer hunting or maybe turkey hunting, and there's a lot of management and care and money and expense that enhances those properties for those game animals. But there's a whole suite of non-game animals that are using these properties as well. We've got a great corporate partnership with the American Bird Conservancy that really helps us and helps our supply chain understand all these great neotropical birds that are utilizing these working forests in the U.S. South. Most folks could, they kind of see the birds, but they really don't know what they are. But a lot of these birds are dependent on these forests, and so we wanted to incorporate. And this guidance is fairly general. It's really hard to write wildlife recommendations because every species is so different, and they require different things and different age classes and different structures. But we wanted to put some general guidance out there. And instead of having almost like two books, okay, I got a wildlife book for Louisiana and I got a BMP, I got to carry them both around. It was decided, look, let's just kind of put them in the back at the, kind of as an appendix, and to have them just there in one book, so people don't have to kind of be looking at some kind of, two different materials. So I was really glad that it went through. They're really kind of general in nature, but I think it's a general guide on what landowners in Louisiana can think about to enhance wildlife. And I don't know if this is correct, but I think it's one of the only states that actually has wildlife recommendations in their BMP manual. So we should be really proud of that.
And I don't think that's very foreign to the landowner, because whenever a management plan is talked about, wildlife is always, well,
Oh, sure.
nothing's all, but most of the time it is on the list. And sometimes it's pretty high on the list as well. That's just the enjoyment that they get from the wildlife.
Well, and I'm always humbled when I meet some of these landowners. Of course, I always learn a lot as well. I mean, they're out there doing some amazing things, and I also feel like I need to be, and hopefully I am, an ambassador for landowners in the state to kind of help amplify them and kind of what they're doing, because without them and without them owning these properties, the forest landscape will change. So this is really first and foremost, thanking them, and then maybe providing some kind of recommendations. One of the interesting ones, Jeff, that I spent a lot of time with landowners on is this kind of this is really an interesting one because it kind of affects this society and how we're kind of viewed in forestry. But this concept of a messy harvest cut. So when you drive by a recent area that's been harvested, from a wildlife perspective, the kind of messier the better. I mean, you do kind of want to mimic natural disturbance, but to our eyes, when we see that, it doesn't look right. It's not a kind of a square line. There's a lot of tops and maybe some big debris piles, and it might look wasteful, or definitely doesn't look clean. But from a wildlife perspective, that's exactly what they need, because if you think about a large brush pile, and if you think about the different reptiles that are probably using that, and then that's prey items for large birds, hawks, that you always kind of see kind of posting around those brush piles. And if you think about things like debris and insects, that kind of insects, then you have things that eat insects, then things that eat the insects eat that. So it's the whole food chain. So anyway, that's an interesting twist on when you talk to a landowner, because a lot of times they want to see it really clean. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it could be a good cost savings, because it can be expensive to kind of clean up sites, we can almost make them too clean. So anyway, that's just kind of one of the recommendations that's in there that is really not costing the landowner much. It's a small thing a landowner can do to kind of help wildlife.
That is interesting, yeah, because we want to see our living rooms nice and neat and tidy, and when you get out in the wild, that's not necessarily so. It's not necessarily the best thing.
We talked about this earlier, and it's interesting. Sometimes some of our biggest critics, out there against forestry, kind of want to move toward this model of kind of preservation. And I think what folks really don't understand is we have, as humans, have altered this landscape, whether we like it or not, with the building of roads and the putting levees up on rivers. I mean, all this kind of stuff that we've done has changed the ecology of naturally kind of what was here. I mean, we have, unfortunately, invasive species that are kind of prominent in our forest. I mean, everyone kind of knows about the whole wild hog story. We've got invasive plants. So these, and if you think about prescribed burning, that used to be a very prominent practice that happened naturally throughout the U.S. southeastern forest. And we've kind of taken that away. It's limited to certain areas and not implemented for a variety of reasons. But so these forests that are kind of left need to be managed. So we really just can't operate in this model of preservation. And these landowners need to also generate income on their property. I mean, that's how these forests stay in forest. And if we take that incentive away, these landowners are going to find different things to do with their forest, and sometimes that's non-forest, and then we all kind of lose.
That is what I was kind of leading to as well as my next question, because there was a report recently about a 2,000-acre solar farm that's going up somewhere in southwest Louisiana, I think. Well, and it sounds, I guess, good to some folks on the face of it. You're going to generate energy from the sun, but then you take 2,000 acres of forest, of carbon of wildlife, of water filtration, of air filtration, and you're taking that out of that area. That doesn't sound like in the long run that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of going on, and I just think we need to be a little bit more thoughtful, maybe as a society, when we kind of want to. I think what I've kind of seen is a lot. We all have good intentions. I mean, there's good intentions out there. We want to let's just call it. We want to save our natural resources, but sometimes we don't think about the alternative consequences of really what we're asking for. So I think it's a great question, and I don't have the answer for it, but it does seem a little bit troubling when we're sacrificing a forest to kind of put in something that's kind of maybe more or less green. So you're right. I think those are going to be real challenges for us as society, kind of going forward.
Looking back to BMPs real quick on that, this is something that you look out very carefully for. You monitor as best as you possibly can. And I would think that when it comes right down to it, it really rests more so on the landowner to make sure that what they're getting done to their property does follow good practices, does leave the land better. And I say that because it's going to be replanted and the incentive to replant. So it really does fall all back on the landowner, doesn't it?
It does. I just want to reiterate again. I mean, we are, of course, huge supporters of private landowners and private lands. And we are going to be, myself included, as vocal to support that as possible. And I mean, we're out there every day talking to some of the largest, recognized brands in the world about how good these lands are being managed, and not only in this state, but throughout our kind of procurement basins. But we need everyone to kind of play their part. And yes, I mean, I understand these are private landowners, and they have, they have the ability to kind of do what they want on their property. And yes, BMPs are voluntary. But ultimately, if we don't have, if we can't get the public behind forestry and forest management, because maybe in some situations, folks aren't following BMPs, that's just not going to be a good end game for all of us. Look, I know landowners are out there growing pine timber, particularly for dimensional saw timber, for the great products, that we use in building materials and everything else. And we're just kind of a part of that. But I think we play a real critical role because, we all know in order to kind of grow a saw timber tree, that needs to be managed, it needs to be thinned. And of course, there's topwood out there that we're using, so we're a big part of that. I would say our customers, when you just kind of take all the, I guess what I call the eco-babble away, I think what our customers and maybe the general public really cares about is they want trees for the future, they want clean water, they want clean air, and they want the biodiversity or the wildlife out there using the forest. They want all that to be healthy. And I think we can do that with BMPs. I think we can do that in this kind of umbrella of sustainable forest management.
How do we approach the folks who live in the urban and suburban areas? Because that's really where the population growth is. And I think, as you said earlier, a lot of the rural folks that they have forests or they are living among forests or nearby, they appreciate it, they know it, and they're comfortable with the harvest of some trees and understand that once they're harvested, they're going to be replanted, and those trees will be back for the next generation. But those who live in more urbanized areas have that disconnect with not just forests, but a lot of things, because products that we use, we don't realize where they come from. How do we approach those folks who are going to be the ones making decisions for what they buy, what their companies buy, what their families produce and do? How do we approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had a really good answer for it. I feel like I've been in this industry for a while now. At 25 years, I'm by no means an expert. There's some folks probably listening have been a lot longer than I have, maybe have a better idea. But I do think that we as a forestry community talk in silos. We're pretty vocal amongst ourselves, but we don't do a really good job of maybe even doing something simple as this. And hopefully this podcast might reach a few folks outside of the community and think about a few things differently. I also know that I think we're putting a little bit too much emphasis on, and we do a lot of these and they're great. I think a lot of other folks do too. We do a lot of videos and we post them on websites. I think we're putting a little bit too much faith in those, that someone somewhere is sitting around at night and clicking on, maybe it's an IP video or one on forestry, and having that video completely change their paradigm on something as emotional as harvesting trees. I don't think it's happening. Now, I think they help, and we need to continue to do them. But in my opinion, and I don't know how to do this at scale, the only way we have been able to kind of change the conversation is to get people outside. That's difficult to do in an organization as large as us, and we're doing a much better job of engaging our customers and some other stakeholders. But you can't get everyone out there. And so I guess your question is how do we get the kind of the bell curve of America, maybe, out there to experience what we get to do? That's the challenge. I'll give a little bit of a plug on a neat project that we're working on that we're going to expand in Louisiana this year. It's related to the work we're doing with the American Bird Conservancy with this really neat bird species called the swallowtail kite. And a lot of landowners may have seen kites. They're kind of more of a coastal bird in the U.S. Southeast. They migrate all the way. They spend their winters down as south as Brazil. They seem to really be thriving on working forest, private lands. They love that kind of mosaic, the different age classes that most forest landowners have. They've got a 5-year-old stand and a 55-year-old stand and a 15-year-old stand. It's all different. One's being thinned, one's not. One's being harvested, one's not. They love that diversity that those forests provide. What's neat about kites is they're highly visible. You can see them, and they like working forest, and they just kind of have this slow flight over someone's property, and it really kind of changes the conversation. When you can get someone out there and they see a kite and they just realized it flew 3,000 miles back from Brazil to the same forest that it nested on last year, and then you have that story, it's almost turned into like an ambassador species for us. So I think we're going to need more of that. We need more connections for people to have, for them to understand that this stuff is real that we're talking about. We're not just out here telling stories here, that there are wildlife species that migrate all the way down to Brazil that come back and use these same forests that we're generating wood products to make these products that we use every day. It's a fantastic story, and I wish I had a better answer on how to tell it in a better way besides just getting people out there.
Well, hopefully we'll make at least a few inroads with each passing day, and each time we do something like this, or like the program you talked about with the swallowtail, which I want to know more about the kites coming up. I really do.
Yeah, well, it's a great project, and like I said, we were hopefully going to get some momentum, and I didn't mention this, but we're actually tagging, we're capturing and tagging these birds, and they're putting radio telemetry on them, so we can literally watch them on our cell phones and kind of watch how they use the forest and when they fly over the Gulf. It's really an amazing story.
Jeremy Poirier, he is the Senior Manager for Fiber Certification and Sustainability for International Paper. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. This episode of Mind the Forest has been sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years of financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office, or you can find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the LFA, and its programs, and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers in the state, go to laforestry.com. You can also send comments and suggestions to me via email to jzeringue at laforestry.com. That's jzeringue at laforestry.com. Or you can check out the show notes for our contact information. Remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.